So I'll give a grateful welcome to Brian.
Woo. All right, so how's everyone doing? Hopefully you're having a good time at the conference here, learning new things and picking up new skills. I know I have. So my name is Brian Laskowski. I work at a web hosting company based out of Lansing, Michigan. That should narrow it down if anyone, can do the math there. And I am going to be talking about malicious crypto mining today. Back in January, I stole this quote actually from a podcast I'm a huge fan of called Risky Business. The idea that with cryptocurrency being so valuable right now, that it is really incentivizing attackers to use it as a way to monetize the access they already have. And so I'm kind of going to go through some of my research into that, tools that I built around it, different detection methods, and kind of what it means for us as far as a new avenue for malicious attackers using in the field today. So it's kind of a little brief overview there. Now, cryptocurrency and internet years actually has been around for a while, but it's pretty recent that it's become a key vector for attackers with access. The first paper on Bitcoin was written back in 2008. And while it definitely is worth a heck of a lot more now, based on, the actual cryptocurrency that's being mined, you don't really need a cryptocurrency to be worth thousands of dollars for someone to want it. So even back in like November of 2013, when Bitcoin was over 1,000, it could have taken off then, but there's kind of a key reason that it didn't, and it really comes down to what Bitcoin takes to mine. If you've been involved in Bitcoin at all, you'll know that people have created crazy multiple GPU setups to, run it on cards until they burn them into the ground. And when that became ineffective, people started creating dedicated ASICs to do one thing, and that was mine Bitcoin. So when you are sitting there with a tiny little CPU in your laptop or your phone, trying to mine something against someone who has, teraflops worth of, compute power, you're not gonna get anything with the way that mining works. The tiny little bit you contribute really isn't going to give you a payout. So for quite some time, really the only Bitcoin-related malicious activity was people ripping off people's wallets, figuring out a way to either social engineer them or take out the repositories, the cryptocurrency exchanges, and transfer out a lot of Bitcoin there. So really it only was applicable to the people who were actually holding Bitcoin rather than a more, general audience. However, Bitcoin's not the only cryptocurrency out there. There are thousands of them now, but there's one in particular that's really become popular as, being used in this type of an attack, and that's Monero. The reason why Monero is so popular, even though it's not necessarily worth as much as other cryptocurrencies, is the fact that you can mine it on literally anything, down to the weakest CPU up to, a crazy, 24-core Xeon, or, above and beyond that. The reason why that's effective is a few things. One is it uses a specific algorithm called Kryptonite, which is optimized for CPU and doesn't scale well with GPU or ASIC type architecture. So while you can mine it on a GPU, or you could create an ASIC for it, you don't get the same scalability with it that you do with a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. And even with that, the people, or the developers, I guess I should say, behind Monero have kind of taken a stance. They don't want that to become a thing. There was actually a recent thing within the last month where one of the big firms out of China had built an ASIC for Monero, and the dev team behind Monero hard forked the cryptocurrency to say, no, we're not going to let you do that. So as soon as an ASIC was available, they made the conscious decision that they weren't going to allow it. So they changed the algorithm slightly so that the ASIC became useless. So with a cryptocurrency that you can mine on pretty much anything, there's really been an increase. So I myself work in a web server environment, so we don't have a lot of endpoints or people behind a keyboard. We're dealing with what's on the other end. Personally, I kind of started noticing this around October, November of 2017. That our traditional investigations for a compromise on a web server, generally we're looking at someone throwing up a phishing page or someone sending spam from the server. Those tend to be the two ways that when a server got compromised, what the attackers would leave there. And around last October, November, I started to notice an increase in crypto miners. We kind of first witnessed it around end of 2016, early 2017, when there were some acquisitions that occurred, and we discovered it running on some of those servers that we acquired. But there really wasn't a whole lot of it up until around that October, November timeframe. And from the data I've been able to find, that's pretty common around. So I've got up the CIS malware trends from December, in which a coin miner was listed as the second highest piece of malware that they were witnessing, as well as the recently Microsoft put together some statistics from their Windows Defender ATP platform, where the top one was towards the end of last year, where you can kind of see it up and down and up and down, but then the bottom one there goes through just this last March, and you can see a much more obvious trend increasing there. So as I started noticing, the increase here, I kind of took it upon myself to figure out how prevalent it was in our environment and what we could do about it. So I am a sysadmin. I'm not in the dedicated security group, so a lot of this was pretty informal, but I did have the support of my management staff in the support side of things. And so initially I started with what I knew, the cases that I'd worked on personally, and kind of going up from there. We do a lot of, one-off cases for different clients, so we often will, reach out to each other in Slack channels. So there was a lot of data I could pull from our internal Slack channels, as well as then going out to the ticketing system, looking for people who had either left it in their notes or had been reported by a client, that sort of stuff. Pretty soon, I was able to gather a pretty good amount of data. I'm well over 100 cases at this point. I try and add as many more as I can as time allows. But definitely some stuff started to kind of trickle out that was pretty constant between all of the cases. And that was really focused around those three things up there. So mining pools, mining software in use, and the network traffic that's associated with that. So while you can mine cryptocurrency a lot on your own, going back to the idea of scale, the person with the most compute power is going to have the best chance of being rewarded when the mining block gets paid out. So a lot of miners put into a pool. So everyone basically runs their crypto miners that are running complex, basically they're trying to brute force hashes. And based on if they're successful with that, they, submit it off to the greater ledger out there and are rewarded. Whoever can break it first gets that reward. So if you participate in a pool with everyone contributing their CPU cycles, you have a much higher likelihood that you're going to break that first. And then the pool pays out based on how much compute power you contributed to the overall pool. So again, it's just an idea that with the more scale, the easier it is for you to make the money. Based on the data that I gathered, we can see that some pools, at least in my environment, were much more likely than others, with a particular crypto mining pool out of France being the top player here, CryptoPool.fr, and some other ones that are a little bit more trying to hide what they are. Like one of my favorites is the Linux-repository-updates.com. And there's a little bit of a difference. So many pools are public, like that CryptoPool.fr. However, some actors will create a private pool. So that Linux repository updates is not a public pool, and there isn't the ability to gather more data from that, which I'll kind of show a little bit further on here. So besides the domains, another thing that stood out pretty quickly is the ports in use when they are communicating back to that pool. So when the miner's running, it's running those calculations constantly and quickly, and it needs to report every time it's run a calculation back to the pool. So the network communication is pretty much constant. And in this case, in my data set, we saw a lot of port quad 4, a lot of quad digits there. So a lot of quad 4, quad 7, quad 5s, and a few others like that. Again, some tried to be more stealthy using more standard ports like port 80 or port 8080. But depending on what you're monitoring, there's ways that you can kind of keep an eye out for that stuff too. Okay, so running back to the pool here, how did we gather some of this data? Well, if you go to those public pools, they're all about getting you on the, the crypto coin hype train. So they publish all the data. So this is from that CryptoPool.fr there. These are the programs they recommend you use along with the recommended configuration settings. So just by simply heading over to here, I was able to gather a lot of information, especially via these configuration settings, to know what program is running. So when it's actually running on the system, you can take a look at how the configuration is set up to know what kind of actual miner is running on the system. Because each of them uses a slightly different syntax. So, I mean, it's not, that you have to know what the miner is, but it's kind of a neat data point to just kind of see what's being used out there. Secondly, they publish how you communicate with it. So here's that list of ports, which might be a little hard to see from the back, but they specifically are saying, hey, if you want to mine this particular block of the cryptocurrency, communicate to us on port quad 3. If you would rather try this block, communicate on quad 7. So depending on what the attacker, if they know what infrastructure they're mining on, they can kind of tune, because different blocks have different difficulty levels. So I didn't get too deep into trying to figure out how complex they were doing with that, but essentially you can get some idea of what they're targeting just based on what difficulty level they're actually targeting at the mining pools. The next thing that became pretty readily apparent and kind of cool to dig into was the keys in use. So, cryptocurrencies essentially run on a public-private key pair system. And so since they're talking to these pools, they need to be able to prove that they're the ones submitting the hashes. So in the configurations, they have to leave their public key behind. And so depending on the crypto miner in use, there's different places you can look at to find that key. And with that key, you can then use that to figure out how much money or crypto coins the actor has actually mined. In my network in particular, I've found over 41 unique keys. Obviously, there's going to be some reuse from certain actors, but in total, I did this on April 29th. I think Monero is sitting at around $250 a coin. That totaled up to $1.61 million. Now, we're not a huge network. We're nothing the scale of, an AWS, Azure, or anything like that. So that was kind of interesting, point to see that even on a small player like us, and we might not have been the only ones targeted. This may have, been in other environments as well, but at least, there's real money to be made here. Now, if they cashed out at the right time, which would have been back around January, that 1.6 would have been worth about 3.2 mil. So cryptocurrency is pretty, up and down as far as, volatility goes, but definitely money to be made here. I know that there's been a lot of stories, recently joking about, 10,000 sites were infected with CoinHive. They made $10. Yeah, that can happen, but you also have something like this, real money. So depending on how it's deployed, how well they're working, and how long they keep it going, because ideally, you're going to make the most money by staying undetected, So if you're not, shaking the boat and you keep your presence there for a long time, you're going to get the biggest payout. Now, you have levels of attackers just like with anything else, and a lot of them don't really pay attention to that, and they will run your CPUs at 100% all over the board, and you're going to find out about it really damn quick. But it varies. Here's a graph showing the distribution of payouts between the different miner keys. I have kind of a few different thoughts on this. So obviously we can see some, some of these keys definitely pulled in a lot more cryptocurrency than the others. I kind of have two feelings about this. One, so that one that has the highest setting there on the graph, they actually got blocked from contributing to mining pools. Because in this case, I saw it on the cryptopool.fr domain. They had locked out that person from being able to access any of the funds that hadn't already been distributed because they actually have an anti-botnet policy. So that was something interesting to find out. So I kind of have two feelings about whether either some people are really, really good at deploying these versus everyone else really sucks at it. Or perhaps after some of the people who were successful realized that they could have their funds locked out, they started, splitting up which wallets they used. So that way, if one wallet got shut down, they didn't lose a bunch of funds. So originally when I started doing the investigations, I was literally looking at the configurations and in a browser, typing in, crypto-pool.fr and search the key within that pool. And then I would go to the next one and it would be over here at moneros.com and that one over there, which hash to us, it was really time consuming. So, lately though, catch all the malware here on Twitter, made it much, much easier by creating xmrhunter.com. you can plug in the Monero key that you have, and it will go query all of the public available pools for you. So that has been extremely helpful in speeding up the ways to find. And you might not know, because again, so for instance, they might be on your network mining to cryptopool.fr, but on another network using the same key, they might be mining to monerohash.com. So it just gives you a better overall idea of what those returns that they're getting on that particular campaign. Recently, they have pinged them because I've been noticing some other cryptocurrencies starting to gain some popularity with the malware authors, particularly SumoCoin. Has started to get up there, which made a lot of sense after I first investigated one. SumoCoin is a derivative of Monero. So it's basically Monero with some new features added to it. And he has added SumoCoin pools to it now as well. So all the awesome on that. Litecoin is another one that's shown up, but it's been very, very rare, and at least as far as I'm aware, that tends to be one of the cryptocurrencies that tends to do a little bit better on GPU mining as opposed to CPU mining. So that one, it's kind of an outlier for me. I'm not quite sure if that's actually in use much. And so specifically everything up to this point, I've been talking about mining on the server CPU itself. But this isn't the only way that attackers are trying to monetize their access. The other form that's quite popular right now is referred to as cryptojacking. This one tends to not use the mining pool infrastructure, but instead it uses CoinHive, which is a group that got together and created a service where you insert their JavaScript into your website, and they will pay you out based on how many clients are connected to your website at any one time, mining Monero in their web browser. So this one gets a little more tricky. Since it is JavaScript, it can be injected in various different ways. If they're mining on the server itself, there's actually a binary on the server that's running. So that is pretty easy for myself and our organization to kind of track and detect. Cryptojacking, on the other hand, it could be on the server. So we have caught it where it's actually been, they've gotten access to the CMS and they've modified the header file and dropped in the CoinHive, code in there. But we've also done various, I did an investigation back in April with a vBulletin site where they were leveraging certain CVE vulnerabilities because it was running an outdated version that included cross-site scripting and SQL injection. So it could have been living in the database. It could have been getting loaded on page load. It wasn't actually in the server files. So another couple popular ones that wouldn't necessarily be detected with on-server settings here. Ad networks are a pretty popular one to drop this in, because then it can run on any website that the ad network is on. And actually YouTube got hit for that earlier this year. And then one of my other favorite oddities here was the LA Times website, I believe it was. They had a world writable S3 bucket. So someone took that and dropped their own CoinHive script on there, and so the LA Times website would load that, and anyone going to the LA Times was mining for them. Kind of like with the other setup with some miners being more popular. CoinHive is the biggest one, but it's not the only in-browser mining. There are others that are starting to become more popular because, there's ways you can block CoinHive using things like, content security policy, and what's the other one? There's ways that you can, prevent it from, even if they inject the code, from actually executing in the browser. So there is some, other competitors to CoinHive out there that are starting to become popular. If you want more data on this stuff, I'd recommend checking out Bad Packets Report. He does really awesome work on especially CoinHive attacks. Just this last week, he found 400 sites that were all affected by the same, they were running the exact same script, reporting back to the same wallet key, which he shut down. And through some communication with him, we found 5 of those sites that were residing on our network, and we rolled the appropriate response to that as well. So we can see, from trends, from news articles, from the fact that I'm speaking here today, that this is out there. It is becoming more prevalent. But what does it actually mean for us as a security industry? A lot of times we like to jump, and there's been a lot of speakers who've, talked about things like, oh, the Twitter thing or the GitHub thing with, plain text password logging and stuff like that. And people really love the dumpster fire stories. We want to, jump on, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. I don't think this is. I think this is actually a bit of an opportunity, and going back to that quote from the beginning from Risky Business, cryptocurrency being like an internet-wide bug bounty program. I mean, the idea of a bug bounty program is that you can take care of a lot of low-hanging fruit for a very small investment. I've heard anecdotal stories from other organizations that they've seen a drop, rather dramatic drop in ransomware, as there's been a pickup in coin mining, which from, a defender's perspective, that's awesome. I would much rather lose a few compute cycles and a little bit of electricity as opposed to potentially having, like the city of Atlanta, the speaker earlier said, $5 million worth of incident response they had to roll. If I can get away with just a little bit of electricity, I'm happy with that. And in a lot of ways, it can point out ways that you are vulnerable. So like, for instance, the LA Times with that world writable S3 bucket. You better believe they did something about that, after they, found out that that was occurring. And that could have been a much more, dangerous issue than just, having a few people going to the site and mine some currency for them. So I'm really of the perspective that this is kind of an opportunity for us, because there are a lot of ways to detect this stuff. And if you can detect it, you can deal with it and close the ways that they, got in there to, start the mining. Kind of covered a bit of this already, but kind of going off of some of the ways that you can, do some detection here. So as I mentioned earlier, the miners are noisy on the network. They're constantly talking back to the mining pools. So if you have appropriate, network detection in place, it's actually quite easy to, see what's going on here. And as far as, the network detection things that I would recommend, one, obviously monitoring for those non-standard ports. So, if quad 3 doesn't exist on your network as a port that's in use, run up a flag if you see that. Quad 7, quad 6. There's a lot of individuals and organizations that are now creating, blacklists or block lists for these different crypto pools and CoinHive mining. So you can create alerts based on those, depending on what you're trying to block. So I'm going to split out some of these detections, CoinHive on one side and on endpoint or on server, actually using the CPU on the server, with the local executable is kind of like the two different things to look for, because there's different ones that you would look for in one case versus the other. And as I already mentioned, non-destructive and exposing those vulnerabilities. They got in. This is your chance to figure out how they got in before it becomes a terrible situation. Obviously, as mentioned earlier, a lot of these malware authors, they're not creating their own coin miners. They're using the ones that are already out there for them. So if you can create some rules based around those programs, the configuration files and stuff like that, again, pretty easy to figure out. For the on-server mining, and I suppose a little bit too, depending on whether you're the one that's affected or not, increase load and drops in performance. So if your web server normally doesn't use all of its cores, which most web servers at least I deal with don't, that's a pretty easy way to tell that something weird's going on. And upon investigating, you can pretty quickly use the tools available and figure out if it is a miner, and then proceed from there. If your users are reporting that their workstations are slowing down, asking them, is it when you're on specific sites, for CoinHive? That can be a little more difficult because they might be going to a site that you don't directly control, but if it does turn out that it's your local intranet site, then maybe you want to, run a little check to make sure that someone didn't, drop a CoinHive miner on that. Some of the tools that are out there. So, as I've been, researching this myself, I built a tool that I put out there and we use within our organization. This is, we're a Linux shop, mostly running CentOS, 6 and 7 servers. So, it is kind of built with that in mind, but it is, a general Linux-based utility. And I've been, expanding its capability as I've figured out more and more around this. So just to kind of, depending on how the time goes here, I'm hoping at the end I actually have a chance to run a couple of miners and kind of show you what to look for if you're on a Linux system. But some of the quick hits here is it's got a couple different scans you can run based on where the miner might be located, whether it's making an active connection out to a mining pool. As well, I've compiled a list of mining pools that I've witnessed in malware campaigns. So in this program, it can do a local blocking on the server, but you can also use that particular block list at a network level if that fits your organization's needs. And then in this case, I've also built in the ability to send reports based on what's found. So if something gets found, it can send a email alert to a specific email that you set up. Now I've built in, the one that I use, but you can change that file and send it wherever you like if you want to. It does have some checks for cryptojacking, but again, it's a little less effective at that because if it's not actually on the server, it's not going to find it, but it could still be there if you load the site in a browser. So you got to take that one with a little bit of a grain of salt there. Going back to the network level blocking, Zero Dot over on GitHub has put together a pretty comprehensive list of websites that are using CoinHive in the wild. So if you want to prevent your workstations from running, mining in the browser, dropping his blacklist at a network level can be pretty effective. I'd mostly recommend if you're going to do a more comprehensive block list like his, that you really make sure that the network segment you're putting it on is appropriate. So one of the things we've run into, or rather I've run into as developing my tool, is that some of these miners have their stuff sitting behind Cloudflare. We run websites. We need access to Cloudflare. And similarly, your end users may, actually need to get to certain, Cloudflare sites as well. So if you pull one of the block everything lists, you might block access to some legitimate resources. So you'll need to do some tuning. In my case, I haven't instituted the more, comprehensive blacklist due to that. I'm mostly responding to the things that I see in actual, in the wild attacks. Tool 3, as I was doing this, I came across NCC Group's awesome snort rules generator. So this can be used a lot wider than just in the instance of crypto mining, because essentially you can feed it any IP addresses or any domains, and it will generate snort rules for you based on those. So just in general, if you're doing any kind of analysis of, the campaigns that are actively hitting your network, you can pretty quickly turn that into, actionable, blacklisting, alerting, based on these snort rules. So if you are using that kind of IDS system, definitely check this out. That's kind of the end of the talk, but it looks like I do have a little bit of time, so I can run a couple of miners for you and show you how that looks on a live system. I do write-ups on a lot of the investigations I do, so if you're interested in that kind of a thing, you can find me either on my personal blog there at laskowski-tech.com, or hit me up on Twitter at Lasko26. And with that adjourned there, let's run a couple of miners. All right, let's see here. All right, so here I've got a local VM running. It's just a standard Ubuntu 16.04 system here. It's got a couple of different miners that I've pulled from investigations we've had in the wild here. And I'll just kind of take the time to roll through a couple of them here. Let's go to case 1 here. All right, so this particular miner really likes to be dropped into the temp directory and masquerade as a PHP session file. So that's mostly where I found this particular setup. It's using the YAM miner program. So while the programs are very similar, they will often, attempt to obfuscate what it's actually doing. So, this is an example of that. And in this case, it will actually be run by a command line argument like the following. And if you were to run it, you would see it, doing all of this stuff. So you're going to see it, start trying to talk to the, cryptopool.fr domain. Taking a look at what that looks like, we can see pretty quickly that there's definitely one thing that's doing something odd on the system here, using 100% of a CPU core, whereas everything else really isn't doing much of anything. Given a quick run of the miner check tool here, it will do a couple checks to make sure its signatures are up to date and that it's up to date. All right, let's run a quick check to see if we have anything running. Again, as I was describing earlier, there's different places where these tend to live. This tool is optimized for a web server environment, so it's going to be checking for the quick run. It's checking for any active connections to mining pools, and it's checking the temp directory. The other checks are going to jump into where the website files will live. But again, you can kind of adjust based on, your environment, should you want to. So in this case, we can see we have a connection going out here to one of the mining pools. Run a check through the site files here, and you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff getting reported here because it's looking through everything in the /var/ww area. We'll play around with a couple more of these here in a minute. One of the interesting things that I found out doing this that if you don't know about, you should definitely take advantage of. We use a lot of open source tools in the web hosting environment here, and one of the things that's pretty much installed on all of our servers already is ClamAV. ClamAV, you can kind of be like yay or nay on it, but one of the things that's really awesome is it can process Yara signatures. So you can write your own Yara signatures and tell ClamAV to run a scan using your signatures. So if you create ones based on investigations you've seen but aren't detected by other AV, you can write your own custom rules around that. So that's what it's doing here. It's actually using ClamAV if it's installed and running the custom Yara rules I've been working on. All right, let's drop out of there a second. Do a quick. All right, let's see here. We're gonna kill that process real quick here. All right, make sure that we are good. All right, nothing taking up a ton of CPU now. And we can see we're ended here. Let's take a look at a different one. Let's see, let's go into, I think it's case 3 here. No. No. It's case 2. Yeah, all right, so we're going to use this one here. So this is one that was dropped into an actual website itself as opposed to temp. And this one used a actual, dropped all of the information in the command line like so. So in this case, they're actually running the configuration via the command line argument as opposed to having something living in a file. So in the previous one, that -C flag told the miner to look for the config within this file. But you'll also see a lot of times they'll literally just drop it in the command line itself. So if we were running back over here, we can actually see that in the output of your running processes. So all of the miners tend to have somewhere in their configuration that stratum plus TCP string. So that's one of the easy strings to alert on because they're all using that particular protocol to communicate, and it's a pretty good indicator that you got something going on there. Just in interest of what's going on here, this is one of the ones that's using the sumo coin, so just kind of thing there. All right, and let's do one last one. So this one here is one that they have actually been dropping in the home directories of different users in a multi-user setup, and it masquerades as the bash RC file, and it has a couple of built-in things where it will try and hide itself. So in this case, we can see that we have a process running at 100% CPU, but it looks at it like a PHP process here. So that's a little bit, different. Let's change our flag here to CD, nope, not the actual command, just regular top. And here we can see it named differently. So depending on how it's being referenced, you might see 2 different things. And then this one will, as it's running, constantly update the cron tab file and add a cron to restart itself if you kill it. So with this one in particular, it can be a little trickier to kill because if you don't realize it's doing that, it will just keep coming back. So that's just kind of a little bit of what's going on in that world. Thank you guys for listening. If you have questions, feel free to come up afterwards here or hit me up on Twitter. I'm very open to giving out more information. So thank you.